Sound check 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good evening. My name is Hannah Elsmore, and I'm the Senate reporter for the Arizona Capitol Times, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. The Citizens Clean Election Commission is the sponsor of this event. As the state's voter education agency, Clean Elections is the official sponsor of Arizona debates, so voters have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter most to them, and vote informed. All registered voters can vote in the general election, which will be held on November 5th. The voter registration deadline is October 7th, and early voting begins on October 9th. Voters that are watching this debate live, you can submit questions at any time by sending your question via email to debates@kc-a.com. Again, you can email questions to debates@kc-a.com, or you can text your questions to 480-840-8350. Again, you can text your questions to 408-840-8350. Or you can call your questions in to 480-937-1253. Again, you can call questions in to 480-937-1253. And I'll try to remember to repeat that throughout the debate in case anyone joins after right now. We may not get to all audience questions, but we'll do our best. And tonight we're going to be hearing from candidates in Legislative District 1, which covers Yavapai County and parts of Coconino County. And we're going to kick the evening off by hearing first from our Senate candidate and then our House candidates. And because only the Democrat candidates agreed to participate, we're going to follow a Q&A format in which all three candidates will participate at the same time. You'll answer the questions individually, though. And candidates, you're going to have 1 minute for your opening and closing statements and 1 to 2 minutes for your responses to voter questions. We encourage an open exchange of dialogue between opponents. If you feel the need to respond to another candidate's comments after they conclude speaking, you may do so. I may limit responses for time management purposes, and we remind the candidates and the audience that this is a respectful, courteous, and professional environment. Our goal tonight is to connect candidates and voters so our electorate may vote informed. So our candidate running for the state Senate is Mike Fogel, a Democrat, and the Republican candidate, Mark Fincham, was invited but declined to participate. And in the House, voters get to select 2 candidates. And the candidates that are here tonight are Marcia Smith and Jay Ruby, both Democrats, and Representatives Bliss and Nguyen, both Republicans who are running for re-election, were invited but declined to participate. And the order in which the candidates will speak has been determined by alphabetical order by last name, starting with opening comments, and closing comments will go in reverse order. So let's bring in our Senate and House candidates and get started with opening remarks. So following alphabetical order, Mr. Fogel, will you start with your opening remarks?
Yes, thank you. I am Mike Fogel, and I am a candidate for Arizona Senate and Legislative District 1. I would like to say thank you to the Clean Elections Commission for putting on this forum, which I think is a tremendous public service. I have been a fixture of my community, Chino Valley, Arizona, for 31 years, where my wife of 43 years and I raised 3 wonderful sons. I'm a retired educator. I have worked in the Chino Valley and Baghdad school districts as a high school social studies teacher, coach, and principal. I currently serve on the Chino Valley Education School Board and the Polaria Health Board. I'm a rather ordinary guy who has had some extraordinary experiences. My background is modest. I completed college with the help of financial aid. My wife and I both worked, and we budgeted paycheck to paycheck, often supplementing our with side jobs so that we could cover normal expenses and sometimes save a little bit of money. I'm running as a clean elections candidate because I'm interested in taking corruption out of politics, providing common sense and collaborative solutions to the legislative process, and strengthen our democratic institutions. Public school funding, individual freedoms, and an economy that works for all are my major concerns for Arizonans. I certainly wish that my opponent was here and am gravely disappointed that the public will not get this opportunity to learn about both of us and what we both bring to our candidacies and the stark differences between my candidacy and his. And thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Mike. And we'll move on to Mr. Ruby.
Yes, hi, my name is Jay Ruby. I've lived in Prescott, Arizona since the late 90s. I am dedicated and have a strong passion to culture, serving the community. I've been an event producer and a director. I'm also a son of the American Revolution with deep roots in Pennsylvania. I consider myself a Rust Belt refugee with Appalachian values. Participate, help others, and question authority. My favorite founding father, Benjamin Franklin, stated, "It is the first responsibility of every citizen to question authority." I always admired those words from Benjamin Franklin and for advocating to abolish slavery in the original Constitution. I'm running to be your next state representative because the Arizona legislature needs to be questioned. Schools, teachers, and students are not getting the support they deserve. Our water is in danger of being allocated for unsustainable growth. Rural hospitals can't provide timely services. And our current legislators promote extremist agendas like defaulting to an 1864 abortion ban and restricting early voting and trying to ban voting centers. We need leadership with dignity in Yavapai County.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ruby. And Ms. Smith?
Hello, my name is Marcia Smith, and I'm a candidate for the Arizona House because I believe in working in and for government to improve the lives of all Arizonans. I'm the youngest of 11. I grew up in Minneapolis, and after graduating from the University of Minnesota, I joined the Navy. I met my husband in the Navy, and when my daughter was 2 years old, I went to law school. My law practice has focused on representing healthcare providers, and my last full-time job was as the general counsel for a statewide Catholic healthcare system. So I'm proud to have received the endorsement of the Arizona Nurses Political Action Committee. My legislative agenda is to advance legislation to ensure everyone has access to affordable health care, to ensure that mental health care is part of our community health system, and to support work programs to build affordable workforce housing in our district. We need to work together to solve the healthcare and housing shortages in our communities and to make Arizona a better place for everyone.
Awesome. All right, thank you all for those opening statements, and let's get started with the Q&A. So as you all know, I'm sure at the end of the 2024 legislative session, lawmakers worked to pass the state's budget. And I like to begin these debates, this Q&A, by asking legislative candidates what they thought of the budget package that was passed out of the legislature. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Marcia. You just spoke.
So Arizona needs to balance its budget, right? So there are competing needs. We have needs for education, for healthcare. We now have a housing shortage that is demanding resources. And as well as ensuring that we have a safe and clean water supply. So I think the budget that was eventually passed fell short on education, it fell short on healthcare, and fell short on all the priorities that I care about. Because of the law that was passed that said you need a 2/3 majority to raise taxes, we're going to have to live within our resources as set forth in the budget, and the revenues that we receive, we're not going to be able to raise taxes. So my priorities as a legislator would be different than the priorities of my Republican opponents. I wouldn't be funding universal education scholarship accounts. I support ESAs, but for the original purposes for which they were intended. We need to support our public education system. As I said, my priority would be to ensure that we have better access to healthcare, particularly in our rural districts. So there's solutions to the problems that we have that are common sense and that I think many of our residents support. But I don't hear our Republican opponents listening to the constituents and doing the things that they want them to do. And they're capable of doing it, but I would take a different approach.
All right. Thank you, Marcia. Let's move on to Jay.
So our budget, we have to remember, we had a surplus 2 years ago, and now we have a deficit. Part of how we arrived there was the flat tax that came through that reduced revenues. This has had an impact on cities and towns having to tighten their budgets. You need to spend within your means. But as a state, with the GDP that we have, we do not need to be tightening in this way. It is an unnecessary restriction. And we are out of balance. We do not have a balanced way of approaching our budget because you can cut taxes with 50% plus one at the legislature, but you have to raise taxes with 2/3 plus one. That is not balanced. Because Marcia mentioned our schools aren't getting the support they need. We're not putting money to healthcare. We're not getting our money's worth from the legislature. And this becomes a problem because cities and towns are right now having to increase sales taxes to take care of basic public safety issues. The city of Tucson is looking to raise their sales tax. The city of Prescott is looking to raise their sales tax. And this is all because they are not getting the support that they need from the state legislature. This is true of schools. This is true of the ADEQ or the ADWR. As a state, we are not allocating money to the services that help us to thrive.
All right. And then, Jay, we actually just got a viewer question that came in for you specifically. The question is, do you think that the arts can play a part in waking MAGA cult members up from their delusions? If so, how?
I'm a strong proponent and believer in the arts because I actually believe it creates experiences where we see the commonality of our humanity in each other. I don't think it's going to be a panacea, but I do believe that I've held events where people from across the political spectrum share a moment together and become more human with one another. So I actually do believe that arts funding can aid the integration of our society and help us establish and build dialogue with one another. And the Arizona Commission on the Arts does not get funded adequately.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ruby, for answering those two questions. And let's move on to Mike. Do you want me to ask the question again, or do you remember we're just talking about the state's budget that was just passed?
Yeah, no, I think I remember. I'm also struggling a little bit to add to what my colleagues have already discussed, but I would say this. This is an old story, and I've been a fixture in this community for 31 years, and I have witnessed the intentional disinvestment in public education during that entire period of time. Our legislators who have, and our state legislature has been dominated by the Republican Party, and they've made it very clear that they prioritize the funding of private institutions over prioritizing our community public schools. And this has resulted in us being at the bottom of per pupil funding in the United States. This has resulted in us being in the bottom of financial effort in the United States. And I'd like to focus a little bit on that concept. Jay alluded to it. We have a strong, growing economy in the state of Arizona. Why are we cutting budgets to our public funds and our general fund? It's because we have a regressive tax system. This 2.5% tax system currently in place is a result of, has resulted in revenues going down this year. It shouldn't be that way. We are a much more prosperous state than that. And then I'm also disappointed because the Republicans have decided to redirect much needed public funds for that are desperately needed in our public schools, have redirected them to private schools in the way of empowerment scholarship vouchers. And this has put a burden in this past year on our budget. We have about $342 million in ES monies that have been delivered to people who didn't need and who never were in a public school before, transferring those monies to private institutions to the tune of $342 million. This is a cost, an added cost to our budget, to our budget. And our budget deficit was about $600 million. So about 50% of that deficit is a result of unneeded spending on ESAs. So I've been disappointed with the budget for those reasons.
All right, and I'm going to stick to the topic of the economy. My next question is, Arizonans are suffering some of the highest inflation rates in the country. What is your plan to ease some of the inflation and its burden on Arizona families? And I'm going to start with Mike this time because he got the last answer last round.
Yeah, how to ease the burden. Well, this is a macroeconomic question that it is a problem throughout the United States, but not just the United States, the world, and has been the result largely to problems in supply chains that took place during the pandemic. That is what is most unusual about what took place in the economy. Now, there are some other inflationary factors that took place, but that's the one that had more to do with what has taken place than anything else. And so we're going to have to weather that storm by creating more opportunities for people in the economic sector. We need to relieve some of the pressure that our young people are experiencing in trying to purchase housing or just renting housing. We're going to have to add some resources to that. I think also what we need to do is we need to put pressure on some of our larger enterprises, industries, to ease up on their price gouging, which I think has been a factor. I know it's been a factor in the inflation that has taken place. We are witnessing corporations like Kroger admitting that they have been price gouging us for a couple of years and then have been experiencing tremendous profits as a result of it. We need to put some more pressure on our oil industry, who has been experiencing tremendous profits, record profits, during a time when supposedly their costs are going up, and so are forced to raise prices. No, this is another example of price gouging, and so we need to put pressure on those people to do the same. Walmart is another big company that has said recently that they are going to start dropping their prices, reducing their prices, because what? They showed great growth in the last couple of quarters. So I think discussions and dialogue with business people along those lines will help to ease the inflation that unfortunately many of us have been experiencing.
All right, and let's move on to Marcia.
So the one thing I wanted to point out is inflation is easing. So we had good numbers in the most recent report. But I like what I'm hearing from President Biden and Vice President Harris about going after price gouging. And I think, again, this reflects our approach, the Democratic approach is, okay, there's a problem. What tools do we have to fix it? Do we have any laws that we need to update or can pass that are working federally or working in other states that addresses unfair price gouging, antitrust enforcement? Kroger which is part of Fry's and Kroger and Albertsons wanted to merge, and there was an antitrust enforcement preventing that because it is well known, and that's when the courts look at whether a merger is allowable, their primary concern is, will the resulting businesses be able to raise prices on consumers? So antitrust enforcement, which has not been well enforced in recent past, has been muscle has gone into it in the current administration, which we desperately needed. So that's another way the government can help its citizens to improve their lives.
All right, Jay.
I echo the thoughtful comments of my running mate, Marcia Smith. I would only add that we need an economy that has access and is fair. I want to remind people, I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania in the early 80s. We had 20% unemployment. I've lived through a bad economy. We're not in that place right now. Inflation is a problem. It is starting to abate. It's kind of coming through the cycle that was a result of the pandemic. I am very glad that President Biden and Vice President Harris are looking at policies towards price gouging. I believe the interest rates are planning on coming down soon. So a part of me is we cannot overreact to certain cycles that come out of the market. That can create worse problems. But I would like to see an economy where young people have access to housing, where wages for teachers are stronger, where the working class, firemen, policemen have a pathway to securing generational wealth.
All right. Thank you guys for those answers. One more economy-focused question. What infrastructure project in your district, if any, would you fight to get appropriations for in the budget process? And let's go ahead and start with Jay.
Fire stations, Prescott right now, our ISO rating with the insurance industry, we aren't the lowest for property insurance rates. We aren't the second lowest. We're the third lowest. This is part of the reason why there's a proposition up here, Prop 478, to increase property taxes. Fire station, I've heard, costs about $16 million, and they need to renovate them because they're carcinogenic. When the firemen come back from fires, it's all one exhaust system. They actually need to separate the exhaust systems so that the firefighters aren't exposed to the toxic fumes that they've just been in after they take off their firefighting outfits. I've talked to some people in the local firefighters union about this. I would look at an appropriation to get that funded, because that benefits everybody if property insurance rates go down. That helps stimulate our local economy. We had what I call a misappropriation, where our two current legislators put $15 million, approximately the cost of a fire station, towards a private rodeo group to invest in a $40 million project for this group. I have nothing against the Prescott Rodeo, but if you have public money, you have to invest it for everyone's benefit. So I think building fire stations that help protect the lives of firefighters and bring our property insurance rates down, I think that is a smart use of an allocation.
All right, thank you. And let's move on to Mike.
Yes. I think one of the items that's been identified by our group as we have visited with municipal mayors throughout Yavapai County to ask questions just like what you asked. What are their major issues? What are their fiscal problems? What keeps them up at night? We have at least one community here that is having trouble with certain toxins in their water supply, drinking water supply. And it happens to be in Prescott Valley. And there are others as well, as this is getting to be identified more and more. And we suddenly learned that the infrastructure needed in order to filter those waters so that they can now become clean drinking water are millions and millions and millions of dollars that just aren't found in the municipal budgets currently, and specifically Prescott Valley. And so I think this would be an excellent appropriations project for Yavapai County.
Thanks, Mike. And Marcia?
So traffic is an issue throughout our district in Prescott Valley, the Sedona area. I am sure there are some transportation projects that are worthy of funding and that would help alleviate the traffic problems that people are experiencing. And again, we have a congressperson representing us who is refusing to take our fair share of federal funding. So it's $20 to $25 million of funding. He has taken $0 because he doesn't believe in government. He doesn't believe in funding projects that benefit everyone. So, we need legislatures, we need congressmen and other representatives who want to work to help Arizonans in our district, and those who refuse to, and don't believe in working in government shouldn't be running for office.
All right.
So if I could generalize just what we've all been saying here, we know how to fix a lot of the problems that they exist. That's why you're asking the questions. The problem is the Arizona the Arizona GOP just won't do it. They turn their heads and ignore these problems and these issues.
All right. Thanks, Mike and Marcia. And let's move on to housing. This does relate to the economy a little bit, but I want to ask a question about housing. That was a huge issue that lawmakers kind of tackled during the 2024 legislative session. And we saw some ideas pass out of the legislature and go into effect, and other ideas kind of fell flat. So housing prices have increased considerably in our state, which was once known for its affordability. What is your plan for improving housing affordability? And let's start with Marcia.
So I live in the village of Oak Creek near Sedona. Since 2016, when the Arizona legislature authorized short-term rentals, Sedona has lost 16% of its housing. So the residents didn't leave. It's just the housing for residents, long-term residents, disappeared and became short-term rentals. And Sedona has been pleading for authority to regulate short-term rentals in a way that would benefit the local community. You know, and Mike mentioned that we've talked to local mayors, and I just have so much respect for those local officials. I think they understand what is needed in their communities, and we need to be giving them more authority to regulate short-term rentals. We don't need to be taking away their authority to manage their properties, which is what my opponents voted for when they voted for the middle housing bill, which was vetoed. It's not one of the bills that eventually went into effect, and they didn't vote for the bills that did go into effect. So they were on the opposite sides of that issue. So Selena Bliss has promised to introduce a short-term rental fix, hasn't done it. I don't think Kwong has even made the promise that he will do it. So we need new ideas. There is a housing shortage. It's a supply side problem. Letting municipalities regulate short-term rentals in a way that helps them create affordable housing in their community for teachers and healthcare workers and public safety personnel won't cost us a penny and will help the situation.
Thanks, Marcia. And actually, we got a viewer question, and I'm just going to have you answer this, Marcia. You guys tend to, echo each other. So I'm just going to have you answer this question really quick, and then we can continue talking about housing. So Marcia, have you seen an uptick in voter enthusiasm and engagement at the local level since President Biden stepped aside and Vice President Harris became the nominee? And if so, in what ways, and how do you think it's happening?
Oh, it's been joyful. We have seen an uptick. We have more volunteers. Jay, Mike, and I knock on doors every weekend. There's always, a group of people accompanying us. They're excited, and they're always asking me, where can I get a Harris Wall sign? Where can I get a Harris Wall sign? So the signs, the volunteers, writing postcards, knocking on doors, making phone calls. She is just making us all feel hopeful, and that we're voting for something rather than against someone. And I really respect President Biden. I think he did a great job, but the uptick in enthusiasm has been wonderful, and it makes me so happy.
All right, thanks for answering those questions, Marcia. Sorry for putting you on the spot. And let's go to Mike. What are you going to do about housing affordability, Mike?
Well, that's a great question, and I serve on the school board in Chino Valley, and we're having trouble, as many school districts in the rural Arizona are having, to recruit and retain teachers. And I just like to give an example of that. Recently, I'm well aware of a highly qualified social studies teacher we were excited to offer a contract to at the high school recently. And unfortunately, after the individual spent time, touring around town and checking out the market, etc. By the way, he has a family of 3 children, husband, wife, and 3 children. And so they were looking for housing, of course, that would serve their needs. And the average house cost in Chino Valley is about $420,000, which comes to about a $2,000 a month mortgage. And we were going to hire him with some experience, and his take-home pay would have been around $2,000 a month. So he quickly realized that he could not afford a house and had to decline the contract that we had offered. And this is happening more and more. This is a very real problem. We know that fire and police, first responders are having a difficult time with housing costs, with increasing costs of everything, healthcare, et cetera, child care, et cetera, et cetera. They're having to work overtime in order to pay the bills. And this is having a debilitating effect on them over time. And this is just not a healthy process. This is not a healthy environment. And we need to address these issues. Some of the ways in which we address these issues is we increase the pool of money that Governor Hobbs has already spent and has already offered to first-time buyers who need help with the down payment. Increase that fund. That will help people to get into homes. But we also need to focus on the supply, which Marcia has already addressed. We've got to give local control to our municipalities to be able to control short-term rentals. There's no doubt. Increase the supply. And then, we can incentivize developers to devote certain percentage of their developments to average markets for average working class people. We can do that in a variety of ways. And so these are all the kinds of things that we need to do so that we all have a chance at the American dream, and home ownership is one of the best ways to build generational wealth.
All right, Jay?
I'm just going to say this is another way that we're not getting our money's worth from the current legislature. We could be incentivizing development for full spectrum housing. We could be letting cities and towns set their own short-term rental policies. Almost every person in a municipality that works in a municipality that I've talked to feels handcuffed. That is the word they use. Handcuffed by the state legislature at being able to set their own policies around short-term rentals. And the distinction between Cottonwood, Sedona, and Prescott, they would all solve their problem differently. But the state legislature has had a history of kind of manipulating and dominating cities and towns. You can go back to like the moratorium on impact fees back in the 2008, 2009 era. That set back cities and towns from collecting revenue that could be taking care of their public safety concerns right now. And again, I would just say there are solutions. The Democratic Party has solutions. The AZ GOP does not want to fix these problems. They don't even want to recognize these problems. So ultimately, I feel like the solution to housing, to water, to education comes down to voting for people like Mike, Marcia, and I, and voting for Democrats in the competitive districts so that we can flip the legislature and work with Governor Hobbs to get Arizona on the right track.
All right, thank you all for your answers. I want to move on to the topic of reproductive rights. So as I'm sure you guys know, the United States Supreme Court has overturned the Roe v. Wade precedent on abortion access. So I'm kind of going to ask a two-pronged question, and your answers can stay kind of short for this question. What parameters to abortions, if any, do you believe could be justified? So be as specific as you can be. And then while you're answering that question, if you could also say whether or not you plan on voting for the Arizona Abortion Access Initiative, which is going to be on voters' ballots in November. Just say yes or no if you're planning on voting for that. And then basically, at what point do you think abortions should be allowed? So let's start with Mike.
So I'm in complete support of Proposition 139. The parameters that are defined in that proposition are wholly appropriate. Um, Abortions without restrictions up to the point in time of viability, as defined by doctors, is I think wholly appropriate. And I might add, this is an issue around fundamental freedoms, individual freedoms are being threatened. And they are being threatened by MAGA extremists who have permeated our legislature. And we need to protect all individuals fully for complete bodily autonomy, complete access to reproductive health care. I'm going to give my colleagues some opportunities to add to that. But so at any rate, yes, parameters that are outlined in 139 are wholly appropriate.
All right, Marcia?
Yes, I'm going to vote for Proposition 139. So that's kind of how I got started running for office. I was getting my training on how to collect signatures for that proposition, so I plan to vote for it. And as Mike said, Proposition 139 does not permit restrictions up to the point of viability. So that is essentially what we had for 50 years under Roe v. Wade, and we don't want to go back. We want to maintain our freedoms. And just because I'm a healthcare attorney, I just want to explain a little bit about what it would have meant if the 1864 abortion ban that my opponents voted to keep on the books would have been the law in Arizona. So in that case, abortion would not have been permitted at all unless the life of the mother was at stake. So what is happening in states where that is essentially the law is that doctors are afraid to provide life-saving health care to a woman if that health care requires termination of her pregnancy, even in cases where her life is at stake or the pregnancy is not viable. So it's not a case of abortions, like there's not a viable fetus. So there was a report out of Georgia. There are 2 women who died as a result of not receiving life-saving care because of an abortion ban. So I am glad that the legislature repealed that 1864 abortion ban, but I'm voting for Proposition 139 because there is more work that needs to be done to ensure that women have bodily autonomy and freedom.
Jay?
Yeah, forced birth is not freedom. I believe in the moral agency of those who are pregnant to decide what is best. We don't need to be legislating morality. And what Prop 139 does is it enshrines the freedom of those who are pregnant to decide what they need to do. And every situation with pregnancy can be very different. What I would say to my Republican colleagues, like my opponents, who voted to uphold the 1864 abortion ban is, if you want to see families who live a free, productive life and are happy to bring children into the world, then focus on an economy that allows people pathways to home ownership, that has viable and productive public education, that has health care that is available. That will increase people's capacity to want to bring children into the world. That would be a quote unquote pro-life atmosphere.
Hey, by the way, folks, just earlier today, just before we came on, I got a notification that the repeal of 1864 is complete as of today, the 91st day since the repeal. It's gone today, right now.
All right, thank you all for those answers. I'm going to pivot to education. I know you guys have touched on it a bit already. So my first question is, do you believe Arizona's K-12 public education system as a whole is adequately funded? If not, how much more should the state spend, and how do you propose raising that money? And try to be as specific as you can. Please cite taxes you'd increase or other revenue sources that we could find funding for public schools from. And let's start with Mike.
Well, that's a loaded question. Okay, so there's a lot there. Let's see if I can remember it all. So, public schools are not adequately funded in the state of Arizona currently, and haven't been for a long time. I have already expressed some of the problems with that. That one teacher a salary that isn't competitive enough in order to be able to afford housing in his community is a problem. So, teacher salaries need to be improved. They need to become competitive, and we also need to be to pay for more teachers so that we can reduce classroom sizes, especially in primary levels. Now, all that costs money. So one thing we can do immediately is to roll back some of the ESAs and make sure that if we're going to give an ESA to a person in a family, they had enrolled previously in a public school. That's what the governor's calling for. And right there's $342 million. Next year, the projection is about, for ESAs, was about $460 million. And that will free up some money that can now be redirected to those schools that desperately need it. Our crisis is a financial crisis. We cannot recruit and retain teachers, especially in rural areas. We are short about 3,500 teachers currently. Without competitive salaries, we can't get qualified teachers in those classrooms that I just mentioned. Hundreds and thousands of students are in classrooms without highly qualified teachers currently. So the really tough, complicated question is how do we pay for these increases and how much? Well, let me give you an idea of the billions of dollars that could be in our coffers for public schools if we were just the average per pupil funding in the United States. That's $4 billion. $4 billion additional dollars. That's a lot of money. How do we do it? Well, it's a complicated issue because of our tax structure and the fact that we have an unbalanced way of looking at our finances, public finances. 2/3 of Arizonans have to agree, in our legislature, have to agree to tax raises. Only 1/50 has to agree to tax cuts. So maybe what we need to do is first start with that problem, which is creating structural deficits forever and ever and ever. Okay. And I would suggest that we reduce the 67% that's needed currently and bring that back to 1/50. Okay. And and then also we need to appropriately be taxing our corporations who are benefiting from our educational systems here in the state of Arizona. And on average, I think their income tax on average is about it's either $50 or $75. I think we could do a much better job of taxing that group right from the start to increase some of these revenues. Another portion, and this is really where I should have began, excuse me. I should have began by saying, this question is asked of us all the time from our opponents, and they think it would stump us. Here's the real answer to solving a problem of how much it would take, okay, and how do we do it? We have to first insist that we have.
Oh,
Oops, Mike froze.
okay. Yeah, let's have you jump in, Jay.
Okay. We have for our students and families in this state. Okay. I'm going way beyond. But our opponents will not touch that. Will not touch that proposal, that idea, because then that means the state would be held accountable. They want to avoid that because they know that they are inadequately funding our public schools. And so how do I conclude? I conclude that we need a lot more money in order to properly recruit and retain teachers and reduce classroom sizes. And we know, because Democrats know, they've done these fixes in other states, but our GOP will not do it, okay? They will not take a look at that and solve that problem, which will turn into real student achievement results. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
No worries.
There's another issue in that our current Department of Education in Arizona lost $24 million in federal dollars. So we're dealing not only with an unwillingness to approach this problem, we're also dealing with incompetence. And it's that combination of like malfeasance and incompetence that seems to be at the root of the AZGOP not being willing to address and fix these problems. Rechanging the ESA structure, I'm not against ESAs. I think their original intent to help families who genuinely needed help for a particular kind of student to function in public school is valid. I do not like the idea of $1 million of taxpayer money going to Legos or ski-doos. I also don't like, if someone's going to buy a piano with taxpayer dollars, we need to have as many students as possible use that piano. Public school, we talk about parent choice. How about student choice through various programs at public schools? Be them in the arts, be them in athletics. The more programs our schools have, the more options our students have to learn. So when you get these restrictions on budgets, a lot of things go away. And I will say our public schools fight valiantly with the resources they have to provide quality education. But we should reward them for this with resources so that they're not always stressed and that they're not losing teachers because of they can't retain quality teachers because the salary lows, or with high class sizes. We should be funding the schools so that they can function at their top level. And that would provide students with choices. I think another way to do that, it's tax structure, it's ESAs, and it's using our federal dollars wisely, which isn't happening. It's just another way that we're not getting our money's worth from both the state legislature and the Department of Education. And we can fix it. The AZGOP has shown that they can't.
All right, Marcia, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so although universal ESAs are considered equitable because they're available to all students, 7,000 per student roughly, in practice, they have increased the disparities in the educations that students receive because most of the $340 million for the expansion to universal ESAs has gone to wealthy families. This has been studied, and there are reports out there documenting which zip codes got this money, and they're mostly in wealthy areas, and mostly urban, not in rural areas. So there are claims by the Republicans that somehow we're saving money by taking $7,000 out of the public school system because it costs $15,000 and if the student stays in the public school. Well, if you're just sending that money to wealthy families, you're not saving the money. And what you're doing is similar to what we're doing with water. You're draining the pond. And, these public schools have infrastructure costs. And it was the same situation in healthcare. If you drain the money out of the pond, you're going to be left with a sinkhole. And, as Jay mentioned, we're spending money on high dollar items, dune buggies and pianos and expensive Lego sets that are then used by a single family rather than being shared among a student body. And we're not going to be able to continue to afford sending these dollars that should be going to public schools to increase salaries and buy, high quality education materials, to our public schools. So, we need to recapture that money. If they can afford to send, subsidize wealthy families, we can afford to increase our public funding for public schools.
Thank you, Marcia. And Mike, when you were answering the last question, you froze towards the tail end, and we have a viewer who wants you to repeat the tail end of what you said as your answer to this question. I don't remember exactly where you cut off, but if you could repeat just the end of your answer to this question, I think our viewers would really appreciate it, Mike.
Yeah, I should see if I can restructure. I was putting the challenge to our opponents who want to know, who want us to come up with an answer to how much more money is needed to adequately fund public schools. And I was suggesting, and I did suggest this to our legislators in the early 2000s in a meeting in Prescott, that we need to commit to a study that explores that very question, like many other states in the union have. The problem with doing that, and why our opponents don't like it, is because every one of those studies indicated that if you were to achieve these particular goals, you need to be funding at this level. And in every case, all of those states were well below that level. They know that. And so they're unwilling to do that study that everyone in the state then would come to understand what it would take. It would be very transparent. But the problem is then all of us would be held accountable to that. And that's what they're unwilling to do. And that is what has put us in the bottom of per pupil funding in the nation and the bottom of financial effort. By the way, let me define financial effort. Percentage of our GDP being devoted to public education. It's last. Our economy is healthier than that. We produce more goods and a lot, and it's increasing. And yet we don't take that growth mode. We don't appropriate public funds that are commensurate with the growth in our economy, nor do we do it that's commensurate with the rest of the nation. And that's where what we need to do to be competitive. And then we will see an economy that is going to explode even that much more. And there's going to be that many more opportunities for our students to do the kinds of things Jay's been talking about, more choices for our students.
All right. Thanks for repeating that, Mike. I'll try to flag you more clearly if you freeze up again. So we do have a couple of viewer questions. One question is coming in from a teacher that's watching this, I believe. So This viewer says, a healthy community that attracts businesses needs a long-term plan for healthy families, in parentheses, future workforce. Head Starts in Northern Arizona are looking at closing classrooms, not because there aren't enough children, but because there aren't enough qualified teachers. Quality early care is an essential component to a healthy workforce. What steps would you take to support parents' access to quality early child education and childcare? And let's start with Jay on that one.
It's the same thing. It's funding. but it's more than that. It's the mentality of prioritizing our very young, our 2 to 5 year olds, so that they get the developmental care they need and the early socialization they need in a nurturing environment so that they can be productive students. Our priorities, I mean, I said it earlier, if you want a pro-life atmosphere, fund education, fund healthcare, fund culture, make sure that our society embraces and supports people who are growing. That starts with child development. And it really, like, there is no profit in like teaching 2 to 5 year olds, but it's a long-term investment in the well-being of our society because we create better humans when we socialize people in an effective way and that they get the type of, I guess, emotional support and full spectrum learning at those ages. So for me, it's a no-brainer. It's like it's like, there's the adage of like, you plant a tree not for yourself, but for the next 3 generations. That is what early childhood education is. We're investing in how people are going to be at the end of this century and beyond. I'll pass it on unless you want to ask another question to someone else.
I would add a little bit to that. Do you want to, Marcia?
I want to quote James Earl Jones, kind of, pay them and they will come. According to a recent study, we are losing teachers at a much higher rate in Arizona than in other states, and most of them are citing teacher pay as the reason that they're leaving. My son-in-law is a teacher, and he does not believe that the pay that he could receive is commensurate with his level of education, and that he's adequately paid for the services that he provides. So he's not teaching in a public school. So pay them and they will come.
This is, early childhood education is also a way to support families. Families are having to choose whether they can afford childcare and early childhood education, while also working 2 jobs. I mean, this is something necessary in order for working class people to survive. It doesn't just benefit our kids which it does in a tremendous way, in the future of our society, but immediately right now, those families struggling with those prices, struggling with housing costs, etc. Universal child care. And it's something that we have to address now, because resources that have been devoted in this state of Arizona to that from Arizona First are going to be going away very soon. And this is going to become an immediate issue and problem. We need to address it.
All right. Thank you all for answering that question. And we have another viewer question relating to schools. And you guys can keep your answer kind of short to this question. And the question is, would you eliminate public funding from private and charter schools? So just give me a yes or a no, and just a really quick explanation as to your answer. So let's start with Jay.
No. But charter schools are publicly funded. They need to have the same accountability mechanisms as our public schools. We can't be having charter schools that are excluding people. We can't be having charter schools that don't have the same type of transparency in their accounting and academic practices.
All right, Marcia.
I agree with Jay about charter schools. Again, on private schools, what happened when they enacted universal vouchers is that wealthy parents who were able to afford to send their children to private schools are now getting $7,000 from the state that they used to have to pay out of their pocket. And those private schools don't have any accountability. They don't have to meet the same standards and transparency or education requirements. Private schools, I went to private schools. I went to Catholic religious schools, and I valued those religious education, but my parents paid for that. They didn't get money, to send me to a Catholic school. So, we're not anti-private school. We just think that the resources being diverted to these wealthier families is gutting public education that was already underfunded.
Mike?
Roll back ESAs so that the original 4 categories of students and families who could take advantage of them in a private school, that is okay. I believe that we do need to review and maybe eliminate private public school charter arrangements. Public funds going to certain charters, okay, the way they are structured, so that private individuals are moving public funds to private assets. This would be like me. It's the equivalent of the fan corporation who has contracts to take care of our roads and highways throughout the state. Nice, healthy, big contracts. And so those contracts are being paid with public funds. Then suddenly, fan company is to say, we're now owners of those highways. That's in effect what is happening with private public charters. I think that is stealing from us taxpayers.
All right. And then I want to move on from the topic of education, but I do want to piggyback a little bit on what you guys have mentioned a lot in your previous answers while we've been talking about education. So Arizona's empowerment scholarship accounts allow students to use taxpayer money that would originally go to a public school to attend a private school instead. So do you think ESAs should be expanded in any way? And would you vote to eliminate the ESA program altogether if Democrats take control of the legislature? I'm going to need just a yes or no. And then just like we did with this past question, kind of a spark notes explanation as to why you feel the way you do. So let's start with Mike.
What was the first part of the question? If you would repeat again.
Sorry, I know it's a long one.
Yeah.
Do you think ESA should be expanded in any way? And then would you vote to eliminate it?
They should not be expanded in any way to those families and individuals who have never been in a public school before. We need to put financial limits on who is to receive ESAs, just like we do Medicaid or TANFs, okay? And because there are some needs, and I think it is a very progressive idea to provide for the neediest to get the kind of education, and that may mean they end up in a private school. I am okay with that. What was the second part of the question?
Oh, would you vote to eliminate the program altogether if Democrats take control of the legislature?
Not altogether. I think I just explained what would be appropriate and a progressive idea.
Thank you, Mike. And what about Marcia?
The same response as we've, I think, covered. The Democrats, Governor Hobbs, when they say they have concerns about ESAs. It's about the expansion in 2022 to all students rather than those who had need for it and the original criteria, and the elimination of a requirement that the student have spent 100 days in a public school. So I support ESAs. I would not expand them any further. I think the expansion has gone too far, and I would not vote to eliminate them altogether.
All right, Jay.
I'll be echoing my colleagues. I would roll back the ESAs to their original intent. I would not expand it, but I would not eliminate the program. It benefits some people, but it's such a small amount of people, and that's being exploited right now, and we're losing money that could be going to public schools.
All right, thank you all for answering those education questions. I want to bounce over to immigration. So I want to ask you all, will you support HCR 2060, which is now Prop 314, which would make it a state crime to be in the country illegally and require law enforcement to enforce that law? And if you don't support it, kind of say why, where it fell short. Yeah, and if you want more elaboration on what that proposition does, I'm happy to answer. And let's start with Marcia.
So Proposition 314 would permit local police to arrest anyone that they believe is an undocumented immigrant. So I didn't live in Arizona at the time that SB 1070 was enacted, but this should sound familiar. So I will be voting against Proposition 314. As the bishops of the Arizona Catholic Conference said recently, although the proponents argue that Proposition 314 is about border security, the reality is it will create fear within Arizona communities, and it will have harmful consequences, and it won't work. You know, this is not a viable plan to address the issue at the border and make us all feel safer. The viable plan for doing that was the bipartisan federal legislation that the Republican presidential candidate said could not be passed, so that we continue to have issues with border security, and he could run on those issues. So this is primarily a federal issue. I think the Republican legislature wanted another bite at the apple on this concept of letting local police enforce our immigration laws, but it is not the right solution, and I will be voting against it.
All right, Jay.
I will also be voting against 314 for many of the reasons that Marcia said. I feel there's a tendency to scapegoat and grandstand the issue of immigration. And when a solid proposal is put forth, the bipartisan bill crafted by Republican Senator from Oklahoma, James Langford, and it got rejected because somebody wanted to run on border issues, whereas this would have solved some of that. The political football game that is impacting people who could be mistaken as immigrants who are residents here it can lead to a dangerous situation, as SB 1070 did. So Prop 314 was put forth by, I think, regressive tendencies. And again, we have ways to solve the immigration problem, but the AZ GOP doesn't want to do it. They don't want to fix it. They want to have a fear-mongering approach to what is really an important issue to solve, which is how do we deal with people who want to come into this country, and how do we deal with the people who are here now, many of whom are productive citizens?
Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
It won't work. It'll be way too costly. Police forces are already overburdened and underpaid. Additionally, it will end up being unconstitutional. It interferes too much with the authority of our federal government on this particular issue. So it's a waste of time. And I'm afraid that too much of the approach to immigration issues from our opponents are fear-based, as Jay just said, and tends to demonize people in an inhumane way that is counterproductive and dangerous, unfortunately can lead to all sorts of violence that is needless. We need to do this in a humane way at the federal level.
All right, and now I want to talk a little bit about water. Groundwater use was a huge topic at the Capitol this past session, so I kind of want to get started on that. There was a package of Republican-backed legislation that kind of fell short in the legislature, and there was just a general struggle to kind of find bipartisan agreement entirely on what to do when it comes to groundwater use. So I want to ask you guys what you think we should be doing with groundwater. So some rural areas want the state to step in and regulate groundwater use in their areas as the wells run dry. Do you support this idea, and how do you think the state should manage groundwater? And let's start with Marcia.
So I've learned a couple things since moving to Arizona about water. One, it's probably the most important issue facing Arizonans, and two, water policy is complicated. And I don't think that the Republican legislature is interested in a bipartisan solution, because any bills that Democrats, knowledgeable Democrats who understand water policy, understand what would make sense and how we could have a policy that works, their bills don't get a hearing. So, they have a certain approach that they want to take, and obviously Governor Hobbs has a say in this as well. But we need to act soon to regulate excessive groundwater pumping, particularly in rural areas. I've learned that. We need to update the 1980 Groundwater Management Act and recognize the connection between groundwater and surface water. And we need to provide for rural water management areas. And I'll let Jay talk more about that, because he's developing some real expertise on how we could develop a rural management areas. So that issue, because there is no regulation in rural areas, a private landowner has the right to remove the water, without restriction, and use it to, grow alfalfa for cows in Saudi Arabia. And there are legal mechanisms that our Attorney General Chris Mays is taking to address that issue. But until we have action by the Arizona legislature to address those issues, her hands will be tied. So this is a pressing issue. It's one that I think the Arizona Democrats would take a more positive, inclusive, we would listen to stakeholders, the ranchers, the farmers, the homeowners with the wells that are, potentially going dry, and we try and move forward on this issue. It's complicated. There's probably no easy fix, but again, we believe in working in and for government to solve problems like this. And the Arizona GOP just, they don't really want any government solution. And I just don't know how we do it without government.
All right, Mike?
First of all, this is a bipartisan issue. When my water runs out in my well and my neighbors, I don't know if they're conservatives, liberals, Republicans, Democrats, independents, or whatnot. Our property values will go down and our life's investments go down with it. That's how serious it is. And our municipalities have to provide water. I'm on an individual well, but our municipalities have to provide water for all of their residents. It's running out. We will not meet our safe yield by 2025, which is in law. It's getting worse. We're taking out more than we're putting back in. No plan exists to solve that problem. In fact, there's not even a concept of a plan that exists to solve that problem. We have to build in some incentives to be able to comply with that. There needs to be management. There isn't any. I believe that we have to monitor what is coming out of the ground in order to be able to manage it. Our opponents get in the way of any suggestion of monitoring our water. For example, House Bill 2123 this last year, prohibiting water measuring devices on wells. That passed. Luckily, it was vetoed. Of course, we can't manage what we don't measure. We got to start with that. Jay has a lot more elaborate ideas on the ways in which that will take place.
All right, Jay, let's hear it.
Yeah, the pressure's on. First, I just say I would love to hear our opponents speak to this issue. There's going to be a Citizens Water Advocacy Group forum on October 5th online. I invite all of you to see it. All three of us will be there. Apparently, some of our opponents might be there. Water is the #1 issue in Arizona, and it weakens the debate when our debate partners don't show up. And why is this important? It's important because on party line votes, Senate Bill 1221 was passed, and Senate Bill 1551 was not heard. Here is what our Attorney General had to say about Senate Bill 1221. Basin management areas establish a bureaucratic web of undefined processes that pose an untenable challenge to the development of fair and impactful water policy. This bill would also threaten to disenfranchise multiple stakeholders across Arizona, from residents to municipalities to businesses. My office opposes Senate Bill 1221, and I urge the legislature to refocus its energy on meaningful conservation and management solutions that protect and sustain all of Arizona's communities. Now, Senate Bill 1551, which did not get a hearing, first, it recognizes the hydrologic, so difficult to pronounce, connection between ground and surface water. Arizona water law is built on the idea that surface water and groundwater are somehow different. It's true, one runs in a stream and one is under the ground, but they impact each other, especially in Yavapai County. And there's one person running for the legislature here who's not even from Yavapai County. He probably doesn't even know what the Big Chino Basin is. But that is basically our main water supply, is the Little Chino Aquifer and the Big Chino Aquifer, which feed Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, and the Verde River. If we lose the headwaters of the Verde River, what's going to happen to the Verde Valley and the communities of Cottonwood, Clarkdale, and Camp Verde? We need a county-wide water policy, which is what Senate Bill 1551 would have enabled, because it would have invited community stakeholders and the county to develop a rural management area to be able to monitor and measure, and if necessary, stop overpumping of groundwater. Our Republican opponents supported Senate Bill 1221, which was the bureaucratic boondoggle, and it had in that bill, it stated that it could not do anything to restrict groundwater pumping. So it was a toothless bill. And that's the thing, is there's these show bills that make it seem they're all puffed up and important, but they don't actually address the problems. And that's it. Democrats have solutions And the AZ GOP does not want to fix it. That goes with water just as much as education and housing.
All right. Thank you, guys. And I want to move on to the last issue, which is elections. We do have two other voter questions to get to, so I'll keep the elections questions kind of short. We've been having some interesting conversations, so I feel fine about how long this is going. I don't know about you guys. But so I want to ask all of you, this first question, you can just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you agree or disagree. This is something I've been asking all my candidates while I'm doing interviews for the newspaper, and then I'm definitely want to ask during these debates. So thumbs up or thumbs down, do you agree that President Joe Biden won the 2020 election in Arizona? Okay, now that we've got that established, and once again, we can kind of keep our answers short and sweet to this question. Should there
I need to say something on that, because our two opponents in the state house race, in the clean elections debate that Selena Bliss was in 2022, she could not acknowledge that. And Quang Nguyen, our current state representative, signed off on supporting this fake electors. So it isn't just the thing of not acknowledging it, it's also that one of our opponents actively worked to create and support a slate of fake electors. Not to mention that Mark Fincham, who is running against Mike Fogel, was in January 6th as part of the insurrection. So that needs to be clear. We don't just have election deniers. We have people who actively worked against the peaceful transition of power.
All right, and then just a follow-up question. You kind of touched on this, Jay. And once again, yeah, you guys can keep your answers to this as short as you'd like.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's totally fine. Do you guys think there should be consequences for individuals or leaders who promote unfounded claims of election fraud, and what should those consequences be? So let's actually start with Mike. Jay, I feel like you kind of got your answer in there.
Well, I think this is potentially a First Amendment issue, and somebody certainly can express that. I think that my opponent, Mark Fincham, in the state of Arizona, who was resoundingly lost to Adrian Fontes in 2022 because, in large part, of his positions, election denying positions, and also advocating and promoting that the legislature be in charge of who earns the electoral votes in the state of Arizona, which, by the way, that takes away our rights, our voting rights, each one of us on the screen, everyone listening to it. That's his position. He is also already suffering from that position, in that the insanity he has brought to our court system on insisting on bringing baseless arguments about election integrity and the taking away of the last election, the big steal. He and his lawyers have been fined for bringing over and over again these baseless arguments, wasting time and resources, state time and state resources. So I think these are appropriate, and will continue as long as my opponent, Mark Fincham, continues to behave in this manner.
Marcia, do you have anything to add?
Yes. Have you noticed that they don't bring up election security when they win? Yeah, I didn't hear anything from Mark Fincham when he beat Ken Bennett in the primary. It's kind of a heads I win, tails you lose. So I think the consequences for spreading disinformation should be they lose the election. Because of First Amendment, they can say whatever they want to say. The limits on that are, defamation lawsuits and frankly, the election deniers have suffered the consequences of defamation lawsuits. I know they don't often pay their legal fees when ordered to do so when they bring baseless suits. You know, we've ran into a number of people who Mark Fincham owes money to because he refused to comply with court order. But you know, it's obvious to me that this is about undermining faith in elections, and it doesn't even help them. You know, if they convince people that it doesn't matter whether they vote, guess what? They're not going to vote. And some of those people are going to be their supporters. So I look forward to getting back to the days when everybody conceded elections when they lost them, and obviously lost them when they didn't file baseless suits. But, you know, I think in Arizona, you know, the voters have made clear that they don't want to support candidates who are election deniers.
All right, and I know I said I was going to get to the voter submitted questions, but I have one more quick election related question I want to ask you guys. Arizona has been at the forefront of voting by mail for about 3 decades. I want to ask a two-pronged question. Do you support voting by mail as it exists today? And have you ever voted by mail? And if you don't support it, what changes would you like to see to voting by mail? And let's just start with Marcia.
Yes, I support voting by mail. That is how I vote. It's very convenient. Our opponents voted to eliminate voting centers and to restrict early voting. So by their vote on a particular bill, they showed that they don't support voting by mail, and I'm sure that they've done it, but they don't support it. They want to take that because, you know, making voting easier for some reason is an issue, you know, for the Arizona GOP today. And, you know, we all in Yavapai County, most of the residents vote by mail. We have the highest turnout in the state. So it's important that we continue to permit voting by mail and further expand it.
All right, Jay?
I preferred the permanent early voting list to the active early voting list and would like to see that restored. I think that was an intrusion on people's rights to take it away if you missed 3 elections. I think people should try to vote every election. I agree with that. There's no need to restrict early voting. It's functioned here for 20 years. It's part of the character of Arizona. It is well used in Yavapai County. Quang Nguyen and Selena Bliss both voted to support HB 2876, I believe, which restricted early voting and banned voting centers. Ridiculous. It's absolutely, it's an infringement of our capacity to vote securely and easily. Passing it on.
Oh, sorry.
I would like to add to this discussion by saying this and generalizing it a little bit more. And that is that in this state, our individual rights are being threatened. And we have already talked about women's reproductive rights. We are now talking about voter suppression efforts, which is an invasion on our voting rights. I also want to add to that free expression rights, marriage rights. These are all being threatened. Individuals' freedoms to thrive, to have the same opportunity to thrive like anybody else. And this is the result of MAGA extremists like Mark Fincham, who have permeated our state legislature and nationally, the U.S. Supreme Court. This slate right here will protect all of those freedoms. It's extremely important that we get into the legislature, flip the legislature, so these kinds of freedoms are not taken away from us.
All right, thank you guys for answering those questions. Before I ask you a couple quick voter submission questions. I want to repeat the ways that the viewers, if they want to, can submit their own questions. If you want to email your question, you can email it to debates@kc-a.com. If you would like to text a question to get these candidates to answer it right now before we head off in a little bit, you can text your question to 408-840-8350, or you can call in your question to 480-937-1253. And so the first voter question I'm going to have you guys answer really quick is, since your Republican opponents failed to show up at this debate, could you let the listening audience know what each of you consider the most striking difference between you and your opponents and why voters should vote for you? So let's start with Mike on that.
Well, I just gave an answer to that. The protection of individual freedoms, all sorts. The other's primary distinction is we provide solutions to real problems that are affecting average citizens every day. Municipalities, their ability to function well as small municipalities. We have real solutions to these issues that keep coming up. Our opponents avoid it. And I have lived in this community for 31 years, and that's the way it's been for 31 years. They ignore the issues of Yavapai County because they are kowtowing to big business interests of Maricopa County and outside of our state influencers. That's what they're more interested in and supporting than the real issues that we are having to deal with in the Yavapai County. So we mean to address and take care of Yavapai County's issues.
Marcia?
So we know from how they voted on bills that they supported the 1864 abortion ban. So that is one very clear difference. They do not believe that women should have bodily autonomy and the freedom to decide what happens with their bodies. We also know that they support the universal expansion of ESAs. They've been very clear that they would do nothing to restrict ESAs and want the continue wealth transference to continue. We know that they do not believe in empowering local governments to regulate short-term rentals or even control the housing and make decisions about their own communities and housing in their communities. So, you know, I don't know them personally, so I don't know what their personal beliefs are, but because the legislature is so close, any bill that the Arizona GOP has put forth, they have voted for. They have not taken any initiative to not vote with the rest of the Arizona GOP because those votes can't be afforded. You know, the bill would fail if they didn't vote for it. So I haven't seen any distinction between, you know, the Freedom Caucus MAGA extremist agenda and the legislative record of my opponents.
Jay?
I think Mike and Marcia have outlined the policy differences, and we've done that for the past hour. I'm going to bring it down to one simple word: courage. The courage to show up and dialogue with people who have a different perspective than you. We're here. Mike, Marcia, and I are here, and we're not afraid to question authority. We're not afraid to question our party bosses. What you have on the other side are people who have pledged fealty to an aging criminal. That's a big difference. I'm not afraid to confront my party bosses. I'm not afraid to say, I don't think this policy is right for rural Arizona. I want to mind Yavapai County's business. I'm not going to listen to someone in Phoenix. I'm going to put my county and my district's needs first. And I'm going to listen to all of the people in the district, whether they like me or not, whether I agree with them or not. It's pure evidence. Last cycle, Quang Nguyen didn't show up to any forum or debate. He missed all 5. So far, he's 0 for 1. We'll see whether he shows up to any of the remaining 4 that are out there. But that's the difference. It is courage and the willingness to speak up and question authority.
All right. Thank you guys for answering that question. We just got another viewer question that came in. I'm not sure if this viewer maybe wasn't watching earlier, but we did kind of touch on this question. So I'm just going to have one of you, whoever feels the most prepared to answer this, just answer it really quickly. We have a viewer asking, how can this area meet the housing needs of current and immediate future citizens and stay ahead of a water crisis? Balancing agriculture needs and human needs is a challenge. Ideas? ? So whoever feels most confident answering that. Okay, go ahead, Jay.
One, we can do net zero development so that any houses or housing projects come in, have storm catchment on them, that there's plug-ins to sewers so that we're taking the water and doing recharge with it. We can educate people on the right types of lawns to have, or not lawns, but like water-resistant plants. There are ways to encourage growth that do not deplete our water supply. Additionally, sorry, just got stuck in my throat. Additionally, we can take, I just lost it. No, oh man, I'm sorry. That's it right there. We can develop in such a way that we get to net zero growth. Infill, that's what I wanted to talk about. We can look at plots inside of cities that need development, and the state legislature could encourage infill. There's a bunch of empty lots in Cottonwood. I've seen it in Prescott as well. You can do development that is inside of cities to help increase the capacity of that city to house people.
All right.
I'll pass it.
I would add, we're not afraid either to do the hard work, which means that we bring people together who have common interests at the table, start talking, start planning, start looking at data, start agreeing on what the problems are, and then what are the possible solutions. And when you bring everybody together, it gets messy, but that's a democratic process. We can do that. We're not afraid to do that on a regional basis, local, and this will help solve a lot of those human problems.
Marcia, do you have anything to add?
So I like the idea of the net zero development. We've heard a little bit about that from some of the folks at CWAG, and they have been able to get developers to agree to that and try it out on development. And so conservation efforts and building for an arid desert environment. We have people who still want to move to Arizona. It's a beautiful state, and we having people come live here helps all of us. Keeps our taxes low. There are many states that would love to have the problem of too many people wanting to come live here. So I think there are good ideas out there if you listen, and as Jay has said, if you have dialogue.
All right. Thank you guys for bearing with me. I know I had a lot of questions for you. I think I'm going to get started on closing remarks. I don't see any more viewer questions. So let's start with closing statements. And the first to do closing statements will be the person that went last. So I believe that's going to be Marcia.
Thank you, Hannah. You did a great job. Thank you to the Clean Elections for giving this opportunity. And thanks for our audience for your questions and for taking the time to listen to us and talk about these critical issues that affect our community. I regret that our opponents elected not to participate in this discussion. because voters need to hear from all the candidates so they can make an informed decision about how each candidate would work to improve their lives. So I'm a product of my Catholic school upbringing, where I learned from the sisters how to be a good person and how to care for others in my community. So my approach in the Arizona House to improve your life would be simple. Always do the right thing. In healthcare, that meant putting patients first. In the Arizona House, that means putting my constituents first. Because public policy is complicated, and the hard work is in educating oneself about which policies will most help my constituents. I want to mention my background as an attorney. So I'm well prepared to do this work. And I'm asking for your vote on November 5th to elect me as your representative to the Arizona House, and you can vote for 2.
Jay, you're up next.
Yeah, you can vote for Marcia and I in the state house race. We need legislators that can listen and have honest, meaningful, two-way conversations with the general public and with each other. And that happens in debates and forums. It's unfortunate that all of our colleagues didn't show up tonight. There's another opportunity on, I think it's September 24th. It's a Tuesday, Prescott Valley, 7 a.m., Chamber of Commerce Forum. There's another opportunity, September 29th, League of Women Voters. We've been invited. We have confirmed. There's another opportunity, Citizens Water Advocacy Group, October 5th, where I believe Selena Bliss and Mark Fincham have confirmed. It is essential that dialogue happens. It is the way that we figure out where we are in position with each other. As your state representative, I will listen to you, protect our rights, and use our resources wisely. Because I, as a son of the American Revolution, inspired by Benjamin Franklin, will question authority. Whether it's my party bosses or my colleagues, it doesn't matter. I'm going to ask questions, and that's why I will help the citizens of Arizona thrive.
All right, Mike.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity to speak to all of you out there. I'd like to conclude, I guess, by sharing some data that was produced by the Center for Future of Arizona. And it is very clear that the vast majority of Arizonans, up to 75%, are in favor of leaders and legislators who know how to work together. I had to learn to do that as a teacher and as a principal. And I would go into all conflict resolutions with this first principle in mind. First, seek to understand. That means to listen, and then be understood. I pledge to take that principle to the legislature in order for all of us to be able to dialogue to come up with good solutions. Let's be clear, folks. We all know that thriving democracies and strong middle class starts with a strong public school system. That's my number one commitment when I enter this day one. We need to begin a long process, ladies and gentlemen, of reinvesting in public schools, community public schools. And we will discover that the economy will be stronger and will be broader and will touch more people, and an economy that will be fair for everyone. We will find that they will thrive in their professions and in their jobs. And when they do so, our economy in the state of Arizona will. I am all in favor of this clean slate, getting your votes, looking forward to it, because We are going to build an Arizona that has a stronger economy, a stronger, more secure, more prosperous future for all Arizonans. So I appreciate the opportunity to visit with all of you tonight.
All right. Thank you to the House and Senate candidates for answering my questions and the viewer questions. We appreciate your participation. This concludes our debate. To our candidates, we thank you so much for participating. To the voters, we thank all of you who took the time to watch the debate and inform yourselves before the November 5th general election. We encourage you to visit azcleanelections.gov for official, accurate voting information.